What made her volunteer for this? The question pressed against her ribs as the helicopter lifted back into the sky, leaving the small team crouched in the dust. The thrum of the rotors faded, replaced by a silence so complete it made the earth itself feel heavier. Out here, there was no safety net, no hum of engines to remind them of backup waiting nearby. Just raw air, raw earth, and the sound of their own breathing. She adjusted her pack, scanning the horizon. The ridgeline rose ahead, jagged and familiar, too familiar. The lieutenant was checking his map, his hands less steady than he wanted them to be. She watched him for a moment, the way his jaw clenched when he realized the compass needle trembled with the wind. Young. Too young, maybe, but wasn't everyone their first time out here? "Eyes up," she said quietly. Her voice cut through the silence like a steadying hand. He looked at her, nodded, and lifted his gaze. They began to move, boots crunching over loose rock, straps creaking with each step. The squad leader, a stocky sergeant with years carved into his face, set the pace. His stride was deliberate, each step tested before shifting his weight. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The desert spoke enough. As they climbed, the light shifted. Dawn stretched long shadows across the earth, gold bleeding into gray. The air smelled of dust and dry stone, a scent that never really left once it found you. She felt it fill her lungs, sharp and bitter, carrying memories with every breath. Halfway up, they paused in the shelter of a rock outcrop. Radios crackled, faint check-ins from other teams threading through static. The lieutenant lowered himself onto a knee, catching his breath. His face glistened with sweat despite the cool air. She unslung her rifle, resting it across her knees. Not aiming, just feeling the weight of it. Her hands traced the familiar lines, the metal cold against her skin. A tool, a burden, both at once. The sergeant squatted beside her. His eyes, lined with fatigue, lingered on the weapon. "Didn't think you'd bring that back out," he said softly. Not a question, more like an observation. She met his gaze. "Neither did I." A pause, then he nodded, looking back toward the ridge. "Guess it means you've got unfinished business." She didn't answer, because he was right, and saying it out loud would make it too real. They moved again, silence thick between them. The ridge grew sharper, closer, its edges cutting against the sky. She felt her chest tighten with each step, not from exertion but from memory clawing closer. Years ago she had stood here, not on this mission, not with this team, another life, another time, a promise made in whispered words beneath this same sky. She had buried that moment deep, thinking distance would dull it, but it hadn't. If anything, the years had sharpened it, honed it into something unavoidable. At the crest of the ridge, they halted. From here, the valley sprawled wide, scattered with mud brick houses and narrow paths weaving through them. Smoke rose in thin threads from morning fires. Quiet, too quiet. She lay flat, rifle extended, scope sweeping the village. Glass glint. Roof edges, doorways, nothing obvious. But her gut stirred, not wrong, just unfinished. The lieutenant crawled beside her, pulling binoculars from his pack. His breathing was too loud. She glanced at him, then whispered, "Slow down. Let the land breathe with you." He exhaled, shaky at first, then steadier. "How do you know where to look?" "You don't look," she murmured. "You listen. The land tells you when it's wrong." He frowned, trying to understand, but he lowered the binoculars and closed his eyes as if testing her advice. She almost smiled. Almost. Behind them, the sergeant and two other soldiers checked their gear, murmuring low. One of them, Corporal Ruiz, pulled a photo from his pocket. A little girl, maybe 5, smiling with 2 missing teeth. He stared at it for a long moment, thumb brushing the crease. Then he tucked it back in his vest, a ritual like prayer. She caught the motion, the tenderness in it. Small anchors in a place that stripped everything else away. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, heat searing off the rocks. Sweat trickled down her back, but she didn't shift. Stillness was its own discipline. The lieutenant fidgeted, adjusting every few minutes until she touched his sleeve, grounding him. "Stillness," she whispered, "even when it hurts." He froze, learning the lesson in silence. By midday, movement stirred in the village. Figures slipping through alleys, shadows too quick, too deliberate. The sergeant leaned forward. "You see that?" She did. Through her scope, she tracked a man moving with the careful rhythm of someone carrying weight, not supplies, but intent. He vanished into a doorway, and a chill ran down her spine. The lieutenant whispered, "Is it them?" She didn't answer. Not yet. She had learned long ago not to trust the first stirrings of certainty. Instead, she adjusted her rifle, crosshairs steady on the empty street. The silence pressed tighter. Every sound carried, goats bleating, a door creaking, wind scouring the earth. Her heartbeat slowed to match the rhythm of the land. And then she froze, a flicker of fabric on a rooftop, the faintest outline of metal catching sun. Her pulse sharpened, not obvious, not careless, hidden but not enough. "Rooftop eastern edge," she murmured. The sergeant nodded, signaling to the others. The lieutenant raised his binoculars, searching, but she stopped him with a hand on his wrist. "Don't chase it. You'll lose it. Let it come to you." He swallowed, lowered the glass. "You can see it." "Yes." A pause, his voice dropped lower. "How many times have you?" She didn't let him finish. "Enough." The rooftop figure shifted, scope glinting faintly. Another sniper, watching, waiting. Her breath caught, not from fear but recognition. This was the silence she remembered, the taut line between watcher and watched, each waiting for the other to break. She steadied, crosshairs aligning. The world narrowed to a single point. Sound fell away, time stretched thin. She could take the shot, end it here, clean, decisive. But her finger hovered, not pulling, because this wasn't just another mission. This wasn't just another target. The memory surged again, dust, heat, a face leaning close, whispering, "Wait for me." The words burned in her chest, colliding with the present. Her finger eased back from the trigger. The sergeant hissed, "Why aren't you?" "Not yet," she cut him off, voice flat but certain. Because she needed to know. The rooftop sniper shifted again, retreating into shadow. The moment passed, the shot unsent. The lieutenant's face was pale, confusion written across it. He didn't understand. He wasn't supposed to, not yet. She lay back, staring at the sky for a beat. The sun burned hot, the air thick. She closed her eyes, steadying her breath. This wasn't about the mission anymore. Not entirely. This was about unfinished promises. About pain carried so long it had become part of her. The lieutenant whispered, barely audible, "Why didn't you take it?" She opened her eyes, meeting his. Her voice was low, almost tender. "Because some ghosts deserve to breathe until the truth is ready." He stared at her, lost. But the sergeant looked away, jaw tight, as if he understood more than he wanted to admit. The silence returned, heavier than before. And deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. What made her volunteer for this? The question pressed against her ribs as the helicopter lifted back into the sky, leaving the small team crouched in the dust. The thrum of the rotors faded, replaced by a silence so complete it made the earth itself feel heavier. Out here, there was no safety net, no hum of engines to remind them of backup waiting nearby. Just raw air, raw earth, and the sound of their own breathing. She adjusted her pack, scanning the horizon. The ridgeline rose ahead, jagged and familiar, too familiar. The lieutenant was checking his map, his hands less steady than he wanted them to be. She watched him for a moment, the way his jaw clenched when he realized the compass needle trembled with the wind. Young. Too young, maybe. But wasn't everyone their first time out here? "Eyes up," she said quietly. Her voice cut through the silence like a steadying hand. He looked at her, nodded, and lifted his gaze. They began to move, boots crunching over loose rock, straps creaking with each step. The squad leader, a stocky sergeant with years carved into his face, set the pace. His stride was deliberate, each step tested before shifting his weight. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The desert spoke enough. As they climbed, the light shifted. Dawn stretched long shadows across the earth, gold bleeding into gray. The air smelled of dust and dry stone, a scent that never really left once it found you. She felt it fill her lungs, sharp and bitter, carrying memories with every breath. Halfway up, they paused in the shelter of a rock outcrop. Radios crackled, faint check-ins from other teams threading through static. The lieutenant lowered himself onto a knee, catching his breath. His face glistened with sweat despite the cool air. She unslung her rifle, resting it across her knees, not aiming, just feeling the weight of it. Her hands traced the familiar lines, the metal cold against her skin. A tool, a burden, both at once. The sergeant squatted beside her. His eyes, lined with fatigue, lingered on the weapon. "Didn't think you'd bring that back out," he said softly, not a question, more like an observation. She met his gaze. "Neither did I." A pause, then he nodded, looking back toward the ridge. "Guess it means you've got unfinished business." She didn't answer, because he was right, and saying it out loud would make it too real. They moved again, silence thick between them. The ridge grew sharper, closer, its edges cutting against the sky. She felt her chest tighten with each step, not from exertion but from memory clawing closer. Years ago she had stood here, not on this mission, not with this team, another life, another time, a promise made in whispered words beneath this same sky. She had buried that moment deep, thinking distance would dull it, but it hadn't. If anything, the years had sharpened it, honed it into something unavoidable. At the crest of the ridge they halted. From here the valley sprawled wide, scattered with mud brick houses and narrow paths weaving through them. Smoke rose in thin threads from morning fires. Quiet, too quiet. She lay flat, rifle extended, scope sweeping the village. Glass glint. Roof edges, doorways, nothing obvious. But her gut stirred, not wrong, just unfinished. The lieutenant crawled beside her, pulling binoculars from his pack. His breathing was too loud. She glanced at him, then whispered, "Slow down. Let the land breathe with you." He exhaled, shaky at first, then steadier. "How do you know where to look?" "You don't look," she murmured. "You listen. The land tells you when it's wrong." He frowned, trying to understand, but he lowered the binoculars and closed his eyes as if testing her advice. She almost smiled. Almost. Behind them, the sergeant and two other soldiers checked their gear, murmuring low. One of them, Corporal Ruiz, pulled a photo from his pocket. A little girl, maybe 5, smiling with 2 missing teeth. He stared at it for a long moment, thumb brushing the crease. Then he tucked it back in his vest, a ritual like prayer. She caught the motion, the tenderness in it. Small anchors in a place that stripped everything else away. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, heat searing off the rocks. Sweat trickled down her back, but she didn't shift. Stillness was its own discipline. The lieutenant fidgeted, adjusting every few minutes until she touched his sleeve, grounding him. "Stillness," she whispered, "even when it hurts." He froze, learning the lesson in silence. By midday, movement stirred in the village. Figures slipping through alleys, shadows too quick, too deliberate. The sergeant leaned forward. "You see that?" She did. Through her scope, she tracked a man moving with the careful rhythm of someone carrying weight, not supplies, but intent. He vanished into a doorway, and a chill ran down her spine. The lieutenant whispered, "Is it them?" She didn't answer. Not yet. She had learned long ago not to trust the first stirrings of certainty. Instead, she adjusted her rifle, crosshairs steady on the empty street. The silence pressed tighter. Every sound carried, goats bleating, a door creaking, wind scouring the earth. Her heartbeat slowed to match the rhythm of the land. And then she froze, a flicker of fabric on a rooftop, the faintest outline of metal catching sun. Her pulse sharpened, not obvious, not careless, hidden but not enough. "Rooftop eastern edge," she murmured. The sergeant nodded, signaling to the others. The lieutenant raised his binoculars, searching, but she stopped him with a hand on his wrist. "Don't chase it. You'll lose it. Let it come to you." He swallowed, lowered the glass. You can see it. Yes. A pause, his voice dropped lower. How many times have you? She didn't let him finish. Enough. The rooftop figure shifted, scope glinting faintly. Another sniper, watching, waiting. Her breath caught, not from fear but recognition. This was the silence she remembered, the taut line between watcher and watched, each waiting for the other to break. She steadied, crosshairs aligning. The world narrowed to a single point. Sound fell away. Time stretched thin. She could take the shot, end it here, clean, decisive. But her finger hovered, not pulling, because this wasn't just another mission. This wasn't just another target. The memory surged again, dust, heat, a face leaning close, whispering, "Wait for me." The words burned in her chest, colliding with the present. Her finger eased back from the trigger. The sergeant hissed, "Why aren't you?" "Not yet," she cut him off, voice flat but certain. Because she needed to know. The rooftop sniper shifted again, retreating into shadow. The moment passed, the shot unsent. The lieutenant's face was pale, confusion written across it. He didn't understand. He wasn't supposed to, not yet. She lay back, staring at the sky for a beat. The sun burned hot, the air thick. She closed her eyes, steadying her breath. This wasn't about the mission anymore. Not entirely. This was about unfinished promises. About pain carried so long it had become part of her. The lieutenant whispered, barely audible, "Why didn't you take it?" She opened her eyes, meeting his. Her voice was low, almost tender. "Because some ghosts deserve to breathe until the truth is ready." He stared at her, lost. But the sergeant looked away, jaw tight, as if he understood more than he wanted to admit. The silence returned, heavier than before. But inside her, another silence stirred, older, deeper. A silence she had carried for years that now threatened to break open. And she knew the moment would come when she could no longer hold it back. The cafeteria had never been this quiet. Not during inspections, not during surprise drills, not even when news of an ambush casualty swept the base. Silence here always carried meaning, orders, fear, or respect. But this silence felt different. Every eye was on her. The girl who had been dragged in hours earlier, her wrists in metal cuffs, boots caked in desert dust, face smeared with exhaustion. The same girl who had stood motionless while officers taunted her, waiting for her to break. The same girl who had then opened her mouth and spoken words that cut through arrogance like a blade. And now she was seated in the far corner of the mess hall, eating nothing. Just sitting, her spine impossibly straight, gaze fixed on some invisible horizon beyond the gray walls. No one dared sit near her. Even the boldest soldiers, men who had stared down live fire, gave her a radius of respect or fear, depending on who you asked. Captain Ruiz broke first. He slammed his tray down across from her, the sound loud enough to make forks clatter at nearby tables. "You don't scare me," he said, voice sharper than the edge of his knife. Her head tilted slightly, eyes locking on his. It wasn't anger. It wasn't defiance. It was something else, something that made Ruiz's confidence shrink by the second. "You should," she said finally, just 2 words. And the mess hall froze again. By the time news reached General Harrow's office, it was already layered with rumor. She was a deserter. She was a spy. She was a test subject from some program buried so deep in black ink that even his clearance wouldn't touch it. Soldiers whispered she had the look of someone who'd seen the battlefield before. Only no one could trace her record, not in any system, not in any archive. And the worst rumor, that she hadn't spoken out of fear at all. She had been listening, weighing, waiting for the right moment. Harrow didn't believe rumors, but he believed silence, and he believed the way silence could crack when the wrong person controlled it. "Bring her to me," he told his aide. The walk to the general's office was heavy with footsteps. 2 MPs flanked her, rifles slung low, eyes flicking between her and the empty corridors. She didn't resist, didn't glance at the soldiers who peeked out of doorways as she passed. She just walked, calm, unshaken, like someone who had already been here before. When the door closed behind her, the general didn't look up at once. His desk was littered with reports, redacted paragraphs bleeding black across the pages. "Sit," he ordered. She didn't. That made him look up. "Name." "Silence." "Rank." "Nothing." "Unit." Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, as if testing him, measuring how far he'd go before frustration bled through his discipline. Finally she spoke. "You already know." Harrow's jaw tightened. It wasn't the words, it was the way she said them. Like fact, not arrogance. Like someone who had already read the reports stacked on his desk. Outside the office, the base buzzed with theories. Soldiers leaned against walls, voices low, trying to piece together who she was. One swore he'd seen her in classified footage of an operation overseas, grainy images of a figure moving through smoke while entire enemy squads fell. Another insisted she had no past at all, that she had appeared in the desert like a phantom. But beneath all the speculation, one truth was rising. She didn't belong to them. She wasn't one of theirs. And yet, she wasn't an outsider either. She was something in between. Back inside, Harrow leaned forward. "You've disrupted my base. You've unsettled my men. And you've spoken words I don't tolerate here. So I'll ask you one last time, who are you?" Her lips curved, not into a smile, but into something harder to place. "You should be asking what I am." The general's office, thick with silence, seemed to grow colder. That night the base didn't sleep. Conversations ran through bunks like wildfire, echoing in the showers, whispered in the corridors. Some called her dangerous, some called her necessary, but one thought was louder than the rest. Whatever she wasn't finished. The desert always had a way of keeping secrets. The sand swallowed footprints, the wind erased trails, and time buried everything that dared to remain still. But inside Fort Meridian, secrets weren't erased. They were stored, cataloged, and locked behind vaults of steel and clearance levels so high only a handful of men breathing on Earth knew they existed. And yet, somehow, this girl spoke as if she had lived inside those vaults her entire life. General Harrow kept his composure, but his knuckles betrayed him. Tight, pale fists resting on the desk as if bracing for impact. "What you are," he repeated, low and deliberate. "I'll decide what you are, and until then you'll answer my questions." She tilted her head slightly, her dark hair catching the dim light. She didn't blink. "I was at Black Dunes," she said. The words hit like a rifle crack. Harrow's breath caught, though he didn't let it show. Black Dunes wasn't a phrase that belonged in any normal conversation. It wasn't a code name on paper, wasn't even a line item in black budget ledgers. It was the kind of operation that officially never happened. And yet she said it like she had been there. "You don't know what you're talking about," Harrow said, his voice sharper now, defensive. Her eyes didn't move from his. 5 went in, 2 came out. One was airlifted, 1 disappeared. You buried the report under environmental hazard. The general's hand twitched. He remembered every word of that report because he had written it. "Enough," his voice cracked through the room like a whip. But she didn't stop. 3 kilometers east, under the collapsed ridge, there's still blood in the sand. You can pretend the desert swallowed it, but you can't erase what I saw. For the first time in years, General Harrow felt his stomach twist. The girl didn't just know names or code names. She knew geography. She knew aftermaths. She knew things only a ghost from that mission should know. Outside the office, the MPs shifted uneasily. They couldn't hear words, but they felt something. They felt the atmosphere tighten through the walls, like a storm about to break. Soldiers walking by slowed their steps, ears tilted toward the closed door, sensing that history was being rewritten inside. Rumors were already spreading faster than they could be killed. Some swore she was CIA. Others whispered something darker, Omega Division, the rumored program that blended psychological warfare with something deeper, something unnatural. But no matter the theory, everyone agreed on one thing. If the general couldn't break her, then no one could. Inside, Harrow leaned forward. "You think speaking riddles makes you powerful?" His voice was low now, almost intimate. "You're a child walking into a lion's den. I could have you disappeared before the sun sets, and no one would ask a question." For the first time she smiled. A real smile, small, controlled, but heavy enough to make the air shift. "You won't," she whispered. "And why not?" Harrow asked, though something in his gut already knew the answer. "Because if I vanish, the files unseal themselves." The general's throat tightened. That was impossible. No program, no trigger, no contingency could auto-unseal classified files. And yet, the way she said it, the certainty in her tone, it felt less like a bluff and more like a law of nature. He stood suddenly, packing, as if movement would break the spell she wove with her words. "Who sent you?" She shook her head. "Who trained you?" Her silence was louder than any reply. "What are you?" His voice was raw now, more demand than question. Her answer was soft, but it landed like thunder. "The thing you tried to erase." The general stopped packing. For the first time in decades, he felt outmatched not by force but by knowledge. Whoever she wasn't just a trespasser or a soldier gone rogue. She was a walking archive, a witness to ghosts that weren't supposed to exist. And worse, she knew she had power. By morning, the base was fractured. Some soldiers avoided her, convinced she was cursed, a phantom stitched into flesh. Others lingered in the cafeteria just to catch a glimpse of her, whispering that maybe she was what the army needed, someone who couldn't be controlled because she already knew too much. Even the MPs assigned to guard her started to change. One swore she saw them flinch when she turned her gaze on them, like they weren't guarding her at all but being measured by her, catalogued the same way she had catalogued the general. Harrow locked himself in his office, replaying every operation file he had ever buried. Names, places, incidents that could never surface. He had lived a career knowing his ghosts would stay hidden beneath deserts, oceans, and coded archives. But this girl had spoken them aloud like nursery rhymes. And every time he closed his eyes, he heard her voice again. "The thing you tried to erase." By dusk, the decision came. Harrow summoned her again, though his voice when he gave the order sounded different now, not commanding, not dismissive, but strained, almost careful. When she entered, she looked at him the same way she had from the start, like someone who already knew the outcome. "You want control," she said, before he even opened his mouth. "What I want," Harrow growled, "is the truth." "You couldn't handle it." His hand slammed the desk, papers scattering like startled birds. "Try me." Her eyes softened, not pity, not mockery, but something close to grief. "The truth is, General," she leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper meant only for him. "You've been working for me longer than you realize." The general froze. His heart beat heavy against his ribs, but his mind clawed for rational ground. It had to be manipulation. It had to be theater. And yet, every instinct screamed that she wasn't lying. That was the moment General Harrow, a man who had faced insurgencies, betrayals, and shadow wars, felt the most dangerous thing of all: doubt. The base was no longer steady. Soldiers walked faster, spoke quieter, and glanced more often at the locked office door. Something had shifted inside those walls, something bigger than one girl. And by the time the lights went out across the desert horizon, everyone knew one thing with bone-deep certainty. Tomorrow, nothing in Fort Meridian would be the same. The desert at night was merciless. Cold sank into bone, stars bled against the black sky, and every sound seemed sharper than it should. At Fort Meridian, lights burned through the darkness as if to hold back the emptiness. But inside the fences, emptiness had already entered. It walked the halls in the shape of a girl who should not have been there. No alarms rang, no orders were given, and yet the base was no longer itself. Why were soldiers avoiding each other's eyes? Why did conversations die the moment footsteps echoed down a corridor? Why did even veterans, men who had carried rifles across 3 continents, speak in lowered tones, as though the walls themselves were listening? It was her. She never shouted, never demanded, never moved beyond the room where they held her, and still her words seeped through the concrete like water through cracks. It began with Corporal Diaz, a radio operator barely 22, who swore that when he walked past the holding wing, she had spoken a word to him, his mother's maiden name. He hadn't told anyone his mother's name in years. He hadn't heard it since her funeral. Then came Private Keene, who claimed she repeated back to him the exact phrase his drill sergeant used on the day he broke his ankle in training, word for word. None of it was written, none of it was in files, but she said it anyway. By morning, the whispers spread. Maybe she's not human. Maybe she's Black Project. Maybe she's the future. And the most dangerous whisper of all. Maybe she's right. General Harrow knew he was losing grip. Discipline didn't fracture like this, not unless something deeper than fear was at work. He tried doubling the guard. He tried confining soldiers to routine drills. He even threatened court-martials. But punishment meant nothing when the rot was already inside their heads. The girl hadn't just infected the base with fear. She had infected it with possibility. That evening, Harrow met with his inner circle, men he trusted, men who had kept operations buried for decades. "She's manipulating them," one colonel said. "Psychological warfare, sir, classic asset destabilization." "She shouldn't know half the things she knows," another countered. "If she's a plant, then someone fed her intel we don't even admit exists." The room turned quiet, eyes slid toward Harrow. Because if she wasn't a plant, then what was she? Outside, rain began, rare, sharp drops striking the desert dust, turning the air into the smell of wet stone and electricity. Soldiers paused under awnings, looking up like the weather itself was unnatural. And that's when the convoy arrived. 3 black SUVs, no markings, no plates, windows tinted darker than regulation allowed. They rolled past the checkpoint without clearance as if the guards weren't even there. By the time Harrow reached the gate, men in plain suits were already stepping out. Government issue, but not military, too clean, too careful. The kind of men who never left a trail. Director Monroe, the lead, introduced himself. His voice was polite but polished like glass. "We'll be taking custody of your detainee." Harrow's jaw tightened. He hadn't been warned, no clearance message, no chain of command acknowledgement, nothing. "This is my jurisdiction," Harrow snapped. "Not anymore," Monroe said calmly. "She's classified above your grade." The soldiers nearby stiffened. Some exchanged looks, because they all knew one thing. Harrow's clearance was already as high as the Army gave. If she was above his grade, then what was she? Inside her holding room, the girl sat cross-legged, calm, almost expectant, as if she had heard the engines before anyone else. When Monroe entered, she looked up at him, and for the first time her expression shifted. Not fear, not curiosity, something closer to recognition. "You're late," she said. The director froze, just for a heartbeat. Then his composure slid back into place. "Stand up," he ordered. But she didn't move. Instead, she turned to the guards in the doorway. Young men, rifles slung tight, eyes darting between chain of command and something deeper they couldn't name. "Do you trust him?" she asked them softly. They hesitated. Monroe's voice cut sharp. "Ignore her, she's dangerous." The girl tilted her head. "More dangerous than the men who left you to bleed at Black Dunes." The guard stiffened. One's grip on his rifle faltered. Monroe's eyes narrowed. Enough. But it was too late. The infection spread faster when challenged. Outside the room, the base felt it. Soldiers muttered. Some refused orders to clear corridors. Others lingered in shadowed hallways, straining to catch fragments of her words through the walls. The general watched it happen in real time. The base, the fortress he had built, the order he had held for decades, was slipping through his fingers, not with bullets but with whispers. By midnight, a storm hit. Rain turned heavy, hammering tin roofs, drumming against steel. Lightning cracked across the desert, white veins tearing the black sky. The power flickered once, then again, and then the base fell into sudden, suffocating darkness. Emergency lights snapped on, red, dim, pulsing. And in that heartbeat of black silence, she spoke. Her voice carried through the emergency speakers. Not screaming, not panic, just calm. "They've lied to you," she said, "and you've always known it." The storm outside raged. Soldiers froze mid-step. Radios buzzed static. How was she speaking through the system? She was still locked in her room. She hadn't moved. But her words kept coming, steady, measured, impossible to ignore. "You've bled in deserts without names. You've buried brothers whose stories never reached their families. You've kept secrets that broke you. And for what? For men who would erase you the moment you asked why." The general's voice roared through the base, demanding silence, demanding order. But no one moved. They listened. Inside the command post, Harrow stared at the comm screens, at the faces of his men, faces caught between obedience and awakening. And for the first time, he understood the full weight of her presence. She wasn't here to kill them. She wasn't here to fight them. She was here to remind them. When the power returned, her voice cut out. Just like that, the base was left in silence, broken only by the storm. But the damage was done. Loyalty had cracked, trust had thinned. And the next move would decide everything. The desert was quiet again by dawn. No rain, no thunder, just the smell of dust drying in the sun. But inside Fort Meridian, nothing was quiet. Every soldier carried her words now, words they couldn't erase. And as General Harrow looked across the parade ground at men and women who no longer looked at him the same way, he realized something he had never admitted before. He was no longer the one in command. She was. How do you hold a base together when the silence between orders is louder than the commands themselves? That was the question General Harrow asked himself as he stood on the observation deck at dawn, staring across the parade ground. Soldiers moved with practiced steps, rifles slung, but their eyes betrayed them. They were present in body, absent in loyalty. Some glanced toward the barracks, some toward the holding wing. Few looked at him. And for a man who had built his entire career on command, that was worse than open mutiny. By noon, the fractures became visible. A drill instructor barked orders, but half his squad dragged their boots. "Pick it up," he shouted, his voice cracking against the hot air. But when one private dared to whisper, "Why?" the question didn't just hang. It spread. Why? Why follow? Why obey? Why bleed for a system that had buried too many? The word echoed in Harrow's mind, as corrosive as acid. Inside the holding room, she sat as she always did, cross-legged, calm, as if time itself bent differently for her. Guards rotated shifts every 4 hours, but she didn't need them to speak. Their silence was enough. One by one, she broke them without effort. "Your brother," she told Private Lasker, "he didn't die in vain. He died because they lied about the coordinates." Lasker had frozen, breath hitching. He hadn't spoken about his brother in years. To Sergeant Yates, she whispered, "You were right to question the report. The bodies weren't all recovered." And to Corporal Diaz, she said nothing at all. She only hummed a tune, the lullaby his mother had sung to him in Spanish when he was 5. Diaz cried. She didn't mock him. She didn't move. She simply let the tears fall, and when they dried, she told him, You've carried silence long enough. Word spread faster than orders. By the third day, some guards volunteered for her shifts, not because they wanted to contain her, but because they wanted to listen. Harrow knew it. He saw the rosters. He saw the way soldiers lingered longer than they needed to near her wing, their eyes haunted, their movements slower, like men carrying something heavier than rifles. And every night he asked himself, how does she know? That evening he went to her alone. No aides, no guards, just him. The door shut behind him with a steel thud. She lifted her gaze. "You're unraveling," she said softly. "I've faced insurgencies on 3 continents," Harrow replied. His voice was steel, his face was. "I don't unravel." "Not in the field," she agreed, "but here, where ghosts breathe." His jaw tightened. "Who told you about Black Dunes, about the reports, about these men's families?" "No one." "Then how?" She leaned forward, voice low. "Because I was there." The general froze. "That's impossible," he said flatly. She tilted her head. "Is it?" "You weren't even born." Her eyes softened. "Do you know what it feels like to remember something you never lived? To wake up at 16 with sand in your lungs, gunfire in your ears, and names you've never spoken already etched into your bones?" He stared. Her words were absurd. They were insane, and yet. He remembered the first time he read a classified file too horrific to share. The way the details burrowed so deep they felt like his own scars. That was how she spoke now, not like she had studied, but like she had endured. "You're saying you have memories?" Harrow asked. She shook her head. "Not memories, imprints, echoes, whatever you want to call them. You're lost soldiers. They didn't disappear. Pieces of them stayed, somewhere, somehow, and I hear them." The general's chest tightened. He wanted to laugh, to dismiss her, to accuse her of psychological warfare. But instead he whispered, "Names." She closed her eyes. "Mitchell, Karim, Alvarez, Brooks." Harrow's breath stopped. Those names weren't public, not even classified in the same folder, scattered across different reports, known only to him. "Enough," he said harshly, his voice cracked. She opened her eyes again, calm, heavy. "You tried to erase them, but the desert doesn't forget, and neither do I." For the first time, Harrow felt the weight of every man he had buried under ink and redaction. He felt them in her voice. He saw them in her eyes. And he realized something terrible. She wasn't threatening him, she was haunting him. That night the storm came back. Not rain this time, but wind. Dust swept across the base, stinging eyes, choking lungs. Floodlights flickered under the strain. Soldiers huddled in mess halls, in barracks, whispering. Some spoke of her as if she were a weapon, others as if she were salvation. One young private stood up in the mess and shouted, "She knows the truth. Why are we pretending she does?" The silence that followed was worse than any reprimand, because no one told him to sit down. By morning, Fort Meridian was no longer a base. It was 2 camps sharing the same walls. One clung to discipline, to orders, to Harrow's voice. The other clung to her silence, her gaze, her impossible knowing. Neither fired a shot, but both waited for the first. In the command office, Harrow pressed his palms to the desk. He could feel it, the tipping point. One wrong word, one wrong move, and his fortress would crumble from the inside. He wanted to believe she was a trick, a weapon from another agency, a plant. But the way she had said those names, it wasn't a trick. It was grief. Real, heavy, human. That evening he returned again. His voice was quieter now, almost raw. "Why you?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, for the first time, her voice broke. "Because my father never came home from your war." Harrow blinked. She continued, whispering now, each word heavier than the last. "And because every time you buried another truth, I felt it, like a weight on my chest, like the desert itself was pressing down. I can't explain it. I can only live it. I carry them because someone has to." Her eyes glistened, though no tears fell. "And now so do you." The general turned away, unable to look at her. His reflection in the steel door was not the man he remembered, not the soldier, not the leader, just an old man who had carried silence too long. Her words were not just unraveling the base, they were unraveling him. And he didn't know which would collapse first. The silence in the safe house felt heavier than the concrete walls around them. Lee Monroe, Viper, sat at the head of the long wooden table, elbows resting on the scarred surface, eyes locked on the encrypted datapad glowing faintly before her. Across from her, Sergeant Vega shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his hand unconsciously brushing the edge of the tattoo peeking from under his sleeve, the same symbol that had rattled the Admiral days ago. Beside him, Torres leaned back against the wall, arms folded, watching Lee with an intensity that bordered on suspicion. Every soldier in the room could feel it. They weren't just running from enemies outside. They were circling truths buried within. "Say it," Lee finally broke the silence, her voice quiet but sharp as glass. Vega's jaw tightened. "You want me to spell it out in front of everyone? Fine. That tattoo, our tattoo, isn't just a mark of a unit. It's not just some classified emblem. It's a ghost." Tor's eyes narrowed. "A ghost of what?" Vega hesitated, then exhaled slowly. "Of Project Revenant." The words dropped like a grenade on the table. Nobody moved. Even Lee's fingers, which had been tapping rhythmically on the datapad, went still. "The Ghost Unit." "Revenant," Lee whispered. She knew the name, but only in passing, a code name from declassified files she'd skimmed years ago, supposedly a psychological warfare program disbanded before she'd even enlisted. "That program was a myth," Torres cut in, straightening off the wall. "An urban legend. Soldiers used to whisper about it like boogeymen in camo. No record, no roster, just stories." Vega gave her a humorless smile. "Exactly, because we were never supposed to exist." Lee leaned forward. "Explain." Vega rubbed a hand across his face as though dragging the words out cost him years. "Revenant was born in the black halls of command. We were engineered for operations no one could admit to: ghost strikes, psychological breaks, surgical chaos. Not assassins, not soldiers, shadows. We didn't just eliminate targets, we erased them from the inside out. Entire cells would collapse after we moved through without a single trace back to command." "And the tattoo?" Lee asked. "The mark of the dead," Vega said quietly. "Every operative had it. A signal to those who knew, if you saw it, you weren't facing a person, you were facing a weapon." The air in the room chilled. Tor's lips parted, disbelief warring with something else, fear maybe. "Wait," Torres said, shaking her head. "You're telling me you were Revenant, that all this time?" Vega's gaze met hers, steady and unflinching. "Yes, and so was Lee." The room fractures. The table went still. Lee froze. For the first time she felt the ground slip under her, not from bullets, not from enemies, but from words. "Bullshit," Torres snapped. "I've served with her for years. She bleeds like us, sweats like us, breaks like us. You don't get to just throw her into your ghost story." Vega didn't blink. She doesn't remember, that's how Revenant worked. Selective memory conditioning. They locked whole operations behind triggers, tattoos, symbols, whispers. When the Admiral saw Lee's mark, he wasn't afraid of what she'd done. He was afraid of what she might remember. Lee's chest tightened, her breath shallow. She'd always known there were holes in her service record, gaps explained away as classified deployments, weeks that blurred into nothing. She had dismissed them as paperwork errors or redacted missions. But now, Vega's words scraped at the edges of those voids, pulling something raw and terrifying into focus. "Stop," Lee whispered, pressing her palms against her temples. This is insane." Torres stepped closer, her voice cutting like steel. "You're saying command built weapons out of their own soldiers, erased their memories, and what? Just wound them up and let them loose." Vega's silence was the only answer she needed. The cracks in Lee. Lee stood abruptly, the chair screeching against the floor. Her hands trembled as she reached for the datapad, flipping through encrypted files, her eyes darting over names, dates, operations, blurred and redacted, shadows on shadows. And then she saw it, a file header. Operation Ashfall. Her heart lurched. She didn't know why the name stabbed her so deep, but the moment her eyes traced the letters, images slammed into her skull. Fire, screams, a burning compound, her own hands on a detonator, a child's face lit by flames. Lee staggered back, knocking the datapad to the ground. Torres was there in an instant, gripping her shoulders. "Lee, hey, stay with me." But Lee's knees buckled, her voice breaking. I did it, I was there. Oh God. Vega's voice was grim. Ashfall wasn't just an op. It was the Revenant's masterpiece, a strike that rewrote the course of a war and buried everything in silence. Broken trust. Torres looked from Lee to Vega, fury boiling in her chest. "You knew, you've known all along." "I suspected," Vega admitted. "The way Lee moved, the way she reacted, and that tattoo, no one outside Revenant carried it." Torres shoved him, her voice shaking with rage. "And you let her walk blind into this. You let her believe she was just a soldier like the rest of us." "What choice did I have?" Vega snapped, his composure cracking. "The truth is poison. It eats you alive. Better she lived not knowing until command dragged us back into the shadows." Lee tore free from Tor's grip, her face pale, her eyes burning. "No, no more lies. If I was Revenant, if I'm their weapon, I need to know everything." The buried archive. That night Lee sat alone in the corner of the safe house, the datapad clutched in her hands. One by one she forced herself through the encrypted files Vega reluctantly unlocked. Each line was a knife. Missions with no names, only coordinates. Operations ending in neutralized. Entire villages wiped clean. Every time she looked away, her hands itched with muscle memory. Movements too precise, too practiced to belong to anyone but a Revenant. Torres kept her distance, her usual sharp confidence dulled into wary silence. She didn't know whether to comfort Lee or fear her. At last, Lee whispered into the dim glow, her voice breaking. "How many, Vega? How many lives are tied to my hands?" Vega's answer was barely audible. "Too many, but not all by choice." The breaking point. The tension inside the safe house reached a breaking point. Soldiers who once looked at Lee with respect now stole glances filled with unease. Torres, who had always been her anchor, seemed torn between loyalty and doubt. Lee could feel it, the shift in the air. She wasn't just their leader anymore. She was an unanswered question, a weapon waiting to go off. And then the knock came. A slow, deliberate knock at the reinforced door. Everyone froze. Weapons were raised, breath held. Lee's pulse pounded in her ears as a voice drifted through the steel. Calm, controlled, familiar in a way that made her blood run cold. "Viper," the voice said, "it's time to come home." The face in the doorway. Lee moved to the door like she was sleepwalking, each step heavier than the last. Her hand hovered over the bolt, trembling. "Don't," Torres hissed. "We don't know who." But Lee already knew. Her muscles knew. Her scars knew. She slid the bolt and cracked the door. Standing outside was a man in a black field jacket, his hair silver at the temples, his eyes piercing and unwavering. On his wrist, peeking from under his cuff, was the same tattoo. "Revenant," he said softly, meeting her gaze. "You were never lost, you were only waiting." The safe-house air hung heavy with anticipation. Every soldier holding their breath as Lee Monroe stared into the eyes of the man standing on the threshold. The Revenant mark on his wrist glistened faintly under the dim streetlight filtering through the doorway. It was undeniable now. Lee wasn't just staring at another ghost. She was staring at proof that her past was still alive, still moving, still breathing. "Who are you?" Lee's voice came out hoarse, roughened by hours of silent unraveling. The man's lips curved in a faint, almost paternal smile. You already know, you just buried it, but if you need the name they gave me, call me Shade. The room behind her bristled. Vega raised his rifle instinctively. Tor's hand hovered near her sidearm, but Lee lifted her hand, stopping them. Something in her gut told her this was a moment that couldn't be answered with bullets. The ghost returns. Shade stepped inside slowly, deliberately, as though every move was choreographed to avoid triggering the tense, coiled squad inside. His eyes never left Lee's, though, like magnets locked in orbit. "You were one of us," he said softly. "One of the finest. Ashfall wasn't a mission, it was your creation. The way you broke them without leaving a body for the world to mourn. Pure brilliance." Lee's chest tightened. The word brilliance felt like poison. "Stop." Her voice trembled, but her eyes burned. "Don't you dare tell me slaughter was brilliance. Don't you dare call me yours." Shade tilted his head, a shadow of sadness flickering in his gaze. "You think they made you forget for your sake? No, they did it for theirs, because you became too powerful, too uncontrollable. The council feared you. The generals feared you. They buried you in a new uniform, gave you a new name, hoping you'd never wake up." "And you?" Lee asked. "I waited," Shade admitted, "because one day I knew you'd hear the call again." Fractured loyalties. Tor's snapped, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Enough! You talk like she's a weapon to be reloaded, not a human being. She's not your ghost anymore." Shade's gaze flicked to her, calm but calculating. "And yet you stand beside her, even knowing what she is. That's loyalty, admirable but dangerous." Lee stepped between them, her voice stronger now. "I'm not your revenant, I'm not your weapon, I'm Lee Monroe. And whatever I was before, whoever you tried to make me, it ends here." Shade studied her for a long, heavy moment. Then he sighed. "You really don't remember all of it, do you? The conditioning runs deeper than I thought." Vega, silent until now, finally spoke. "She doesn't need to remember. We've carried enough ghosts for a lifetime." The shattering truth. Shade smiled faintly. "You think this is about memory, about guilt? No, this is about survival." He reached into his jacket, not for a weapon but for a small data chip. He placed it gently on the table. "This contains the archive. Every Revenant op, every classified strike, every erased name, including Ashfall." The room froze. Shade's voice lowered, dangerous in its calm. "The Council has been hunting you not to kill you, but to keep this buried. If the galaxy knew what was done in their name, entire governments would fall overnight. You, Viper, are the key. Not because of what you did, but because you are the proof." Lee's blood ran cold. Proof. She wasn't just a soldier caught in shadows. She was the fulcrum of history, the piece that could topple empires. Tor's jaw tightened. "So that's it. They'll never stop hunting her, not until she's silenced and the truth with her." The choice. The room fell into a tense silence. Lee stared at the chip on the table, the glow of its encrypted seal flickering like a heartbeat. Her mind spiraled. She saw the faces of the villagers in her fragmented memories, the fire of Ashfall. She saw the Admiral's fear, the cracks in her squad's trust. She saw Tor's steady gaze, half suspicion, half loyalty. Shade's voice slithered back into the silence. "You could bury it again, walk away, pretend none of this ever happened, live the life they built for you, or you could embrace what you are, release the archive, shatter their control, let the galaxy know the truth." "And burn everything down," Tor's muttered. Shade didn't deny it. Sometimes fire is the only way to cleanse rot. The storm breaks. Before Lee could answer, the safehouse walls shook with a distant boom. Dust rained from the ceiling. "Contact!" Vega barked, rushing to the window. In the distance, armored vehicles rolled through the narrow streets, black-clad strike teams fanning out with brutal precision. "They found us," Tor's hissed, chambering around. Shade remained eerily calm. "They were always going to." He turned to Lee, his eyes sharp. So decide, Viper, run as a soldier or stand as a revenant. Lee's heart pounded as she gripped the chip. Outside, the thunder of boots and engines drew closer. Inside, every eye in the room fixed on her. The weight of centuries of secrets pressed down, her legacy, her curse, her choice. Fire and steel. Lee closed her fist around the chip. We fight, not for them, not for Revenant, for the truth. Tor's eyes widened, then hardened with resolve. Then we stand with you. Vega gave a grim nod, his rifle ready. Always. Shade smiled faintly, like a teacher watching a pupil finally accept the lesson. Then let the dead rise. The door shattered as enemy forces stormed the safe house. The room exploded into chaos, gunfire, shouted commands, the acrid sting of smoke, grenades. But Lee wasn't the same soldier who had walked into this room hours ago. The fragments of her past had sharpened her into something new, something terrifying. She moved with lethal precision, instincts she hadn't known she had carving through the chaos. Every strike, every motion, carried the weight of two lives, Lee Monroe the soldier and Viper the revenant. Tors fought at her side, fierce and unrelenting. Vega covered their flanks with ruthless efficiency. And Shade was a shadow, moving with a fluidity that seemed almost inhuman. Together they carved a path through the strike teams, a storm of fire and steel. The escape. Smoke choked the air as the squad broke through the collapsing walls of the safe house, spilling into the night streets. Explosions rippled behind them. They ran not just from enemies but toward destiny, toward the truth. Lee clutched the chip like a lifeline. She could feel its weight in her palm, heavier than any weapon she had ever carried. They reached the edge of the city, where a battered evac transport waited, Vega's contingency. Its engines roared as they clambered aboard, bullets sparking against its hull. Tors slammed the hatch shut. Go, go. The transport lifted into the night, leaving fire and shadows in its wake. The legacy. As the city shrank below them, Lee sank into the seat, her chest heaving, the chip still clutched tight. Tors sat across from her, blood streaking her face, eyes locked on Lee. You know what happens if you release it. Whole governments could collapse. Millions could die in the fallout. Lee met her gaze, steady now. And if I do, we stay pawns, ghosts, puppets on strings. Shade leaned against the wall, watching her with something like pride. The world will call you a traitor, a monster, a revenant reborn. Lee looked down at the chip, then back at Tors, at Vega, at the battered soldiers who had chosen to stand with her. Then let them, she said quietly, because monsters can burn down empires, and maybe from the ashes something better can rise. The transport roared into the dark horizon, carrying with it the most dangerous truth the galaxy had ever buried, and the soldier who had chosen to set it free. Epilogue. Months later, whispers spread like wildfire across the stars. Governments toppled, councils fractured, soldiers deserted. The Revenant Archive had been unleashed, and with it, the myth of invincible power shattered. And in the chaos, a new legend grew. They called her Viper, the ghost who broke chains, the weapon who chose to become a voice. And wherever power trembled, wherever secrets threatened to strangle truth, soldiers whispered that she was coming. Not as a revenant, but as Lee Monroe. End of story.